Welcome to the Performance Matters Podcast with your hosts, Matrix Ferreira and Miles Methner, brought to you by Iron Performance Center.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the Performance Matters Podcast. I'm your host, Matrix, and today we are joined by Coach Tanner Kerr, the Director of Performance both for the Vancouver Bandits CBL basketball team and the BC Lions. Tanner, welcome to the show. And first off, big shout out to our sponsor, Pete Method Photography, the premier sportsographer in the Niagara region. Of course, you want to reach him, www.petemethodphotography.com. Support local, awesome dude. So, Tanner, for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself, quick.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. Appreciate the time. I'm happy to be contributing to Iron Performance, such a amazing facility. I see you guys doing outstanding work, especially in the private sector. I think it's so well needed. So huge kudos to you guys. Thank you so much for having me on. And background on me, man, I'm from the Burlington area, so fairly local to where you guys are situated. Migrated east to Ottawa, worked in the collegiate setting, professional setting for a little bit, and then I migrated out to the West Coast, where I worked in the collegiate setting for 4 years, and then spliced in some pro with the Bandit situation. And now, as you were alluding to, I'm with the two pro organizations here in Vancouver. So I've been here for 4.5 years now. And more recently, just ventured more so back into the private space for performance solutions, consultation, education, stuff like that. So pretty busy year round, but life's good, man.
Awesome. Love it. So I'll just dive right into it, really. Was there an experience, like one experience that really shaped how you coach today?
One experience is hard, but I mean, I think in terms of how I approach training, how I interact with my athletes, how I communicate with shareholders, it all stems from my experience as an athlete. And I know that's our field, especially, is saturated by people who have been student athletes, collegiate level athletes, professional level athletes. But I think I've seen a lot of environments being in the shoes of an athlete where the relationship goes south for whatever reason and the environment is outstanding for whatever reason, right? So you take bits and pieces of that, and I kind of distilled my own approach, just trying to stay true to myself and seeing what works ultimately, right? So I think being genuine, being an excellent communicator, understanding that people who make decisions around you, people who you work with when it comes to athletes, for the most part, have no idea what you do and what you're talking about. So being able to disseminate really complex topics and subject matter to really simplistic means and methods in a 10 to 20 second window is incredibly important. And at the end of the day, it's just meeting people where they're at and sharing a collective goal, right?
Yeah, of course. No, it's a good point. I think sometimes you kind of go deep down the rabbit hole and kind of forget the human aspect sometimes. Here's a fun one for you. Is there a belief about training that you used to swear by that you now think was incomplete or even just flat out wrong?
I would say proficiency with the barbell. I think based on
Ooh.
how I was developed, everything was of the Poliquin school of thought. It was then
Mhm.
stemmed from the Poliquin school of thought to Olympic lifting bias. So everything was delivered with a barbell. You had to be highly, highly proficient with a barbell. And that's simply not the case in my opinion, especially when you go and work with higher and higher level athletes. Usually the higher up you work in the context of sports performance and high performance settings, the less barbell work you'll often see.
Mhm. Wow. No, that's pretty good. We've found that too, right? Like I think everyone has that kind of like, not really old school thinking, but I think that's kind of like what they get married to almost. They have like, they're a Poliquin guy or they're a triphasic guy. They kind of get like married to these systems or these philosophies, you want to call that. Um, when I think a lot of times in reality, this is the person, we're not trying to squeeze them into a mold, but simply build a mold around them, find the low weak points that we can tackle and just pick the apparatus or the tools that work best for them, right? So, um,
Yeah, and it's funny because
how would you
whenever I
personally
give the,
define
the the guys the ability to self-select, oh, so sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Uh, but when I give them the ability to self-select, oftentimes, especially in the context of the CFL, you can see how apprehensive guys are with a barbell because they've come from Power Four institutions where they were training for 3 or 4 years and getting obliterated with a barbell. But now that they have a little bit of autonomy, they're extremely apprehensive towards it, you know? So it's interesting when you allow them the freedom to choose. The vast majority of them will not gravitate towards barbell tasks.
I see. I see. All right. So yeah, I'll go back to the question. I think it was just like the audio got cut or the connection got cut. But the question I was going to ask was, how do you personally define performance, and how has that definition evolved as you've worked across the collegiate side of things, the professional side of things, but also now in the private side of things? Does that definition change at all?
I would say so overall. Like, if I were to consider a really simplistic definition of performance, it's ultimately kind of the notion of the shotgun versus the sniper approach. Like, a shotgun can hit its target devoid of any real skill, whereas the sniper is ultimately able to hit its target in a very refined amount of overall volume, if you will, right? So that takes specificity, that takes clarity in terms of interpreting sports science, like GPS information, force plate information, whatever the case may be, and being able to refine your approach and move the needle from health or performance side of things with minimum effective dose. So we're not
Hmm.
impacting the athlete's readiness or fatigue in a negative manner, right? More so in terms of how that's evolved for me,
Yeah.
it's more so an expanded network of like, okay, what are we managing in terms of the weight room to ultimately what is the overall ecosystem like? We as strength and conditioning coaches ultimately understand sporting demands at a really, really high level. We understand notions of energy systems, work rest ratios, cumulative fatigue, training density, all these things that we can transfer to the realm of where sport is played at a high level. So we can, in a lot of ways, manage the ecosystem at large and help people on the sports staff manage that ecosystem too.
Nice. Nice, 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 nice. Okay. So then saying that, what do you think any belief, if any, in performance is most likely to age over the next decade?
Is most likely to age. What do you mean? Like fizzle out?
Like poorly. Yeah, like fizzle out. Because again, we've seen like the realm of sports science, the realm of performance as a whole has evolved to a certain point. And again, there's always something new coming out, and there's always I think a lot of people gravitate towards like what we call like the shiny object syndrome sometimes. Um, so I'm curious now because we have these certain beliefs in performance, and we're always evolving them. I'm curious myself, like what might age poorly and be like, oh wow, like what we thought we were doing might not be effective anymore, almost, or change.
I would say the notion of the majority of work being done within the context of strength and conditioning, whether it's speed work, weight room work, whatever the case may be, but the majority, if we're talking about like the ratio overall, the majority of the training being output based and versus input based. I think traditionally anyways,
Yeah.
and even just like moderate strength and conditioning, certainly at the collegiate level, so much of what you see is asking outputs on a day-to-day basis, whereas certainly the higher up you work in pro sport, even like youth development, like long-term athletic development, I would argue that shifting that ratio to more inputs in terms of motor learning and skill acquisition and overall just managing the robustness of an athlete, I think that ratio over the next couple of years is going to start to hopefully shift where we're not just constantly chasing outputs for 3 4 years and we're actually able to give these kids a runway to develop.
Yeah. No, that's a good way of looking at it because it's true, right? But that's the things that coaches want to see and that they've kind of been like almost honed in their brain that outputs are the only thing that matter almost. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Okay. So then do you think the industry as it stands right now currently overvalues metrics and maybe undervalues coaching?
I would say so. Like, I know there's a lot of practitioners out there doing a lot of really high quality work on the sports science side that are really keen on the back end work, that are really keen on collecting as many data points as possible. But then when you peel back a layer and take a step back, there's a lot of poor movement happening. There's not a lot of skill acquisition. You might see a million data points collected on a force plate, but like their jumps look like shit. Or you are collecting nonstop speed information, but like there's a lot to be said about what kind of work is going on from a speed development standpoint. So going back to like the outputs versus the inputs thing, like you're not actually cultivating an environment where you're improving these kids from like a technical slash skill acquisition standpoint. And you're just seeing a lot of people just double down on the metrics itself. So I think like not to be absolutist by any stretch of the imagination, but I think like finding balance in that I think is really important. But I can't emphasize the importance of coaching enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's people like, it goes back to that conversation like we just talked about is I think people get so caught up in the outputs and a way to quantify it to almost like define the value of what they're doing, like, "See, this is working," or "See, this is a lead," or "This is what we wanna be right now." But they also negate the fact that, well, how was it executed? It's not just, what happened, but how we get to that point, you know what I mean? Like, was it consistent? Was it, is there any, is it standardized? Like, are we just kind of running through the motions just to chase the number itself, you know? Um, but I'm always curious, and
Yeah,
I think this
and you
next
like
question
and you
kind of
talked
builds
about
on the
like
next one.
the oh my
No,
bad.
go
You were
ahead,
talking about
finish.
like the shiny toy kind of effect too. Like I think a lot of younger coaches who I'm assuming are listening to this will like gravitate towards the shiny toy. And I think them improving their skill set and their knowledge base around those resources are really important for their overall development. But like, it's not going to tell you the whole story. I think it is just a resource at the end of the day because like you can see a counter movement jump from a metric standpoint with like really low counter movement depth or a great time to take off. And you might say like, oh, we have an elastic athlete. We should bucket him in this kind of approach. But like that might just be like a health and function issue. Like that athlete might be dealing with patellofemoral pain, and you just need to check like the basic health box. But like if you simply just like hone in on the force play metrics, like you're gonna miss the big picture at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, of course. Like, no, that's a very common thing, and I'm glad we can kind of clarify that because it is important for young coaches to hear that. It's another tool in the toolbox. Don't just kind of hang your hat on like that's the thing that's going to define the job you're doing, right? It's like it's a more there's a whole holistic thing we have to kind of examine. So on the data points, I want to kind of talk about a little bit. Um, is there a moment where the data directly contradicted what you felt was working? And did this, if ever, force you to change your approach?
Yeah, that's where I really started to change my bias of the overall importance of Olympic lifting. So like running
Nice.
correlation coefficients on sprinting performance. Cause like back when I was working in the collegiate setting, like I worked a lot with track and field athletes and I still do to a certain extent, but just more like on a case by case basis. However, I would do correlation coefficients with my coworker at the time, K Rob, who's with the Argos in the 905, and we would see correlation of zero point 0.4 or lower, which is like fairly low correlation to 10, 20, 30-meter sprint performance. Whereas something like a push jerk, something like a counter movement or a non counter movement split jump, or even like a trap bar power shrug had higher correlations. So it's like, not to negate Olympic lifting, because I think there is a lot of benefits to them for a lot of different populations in terms of how I was allocating my energy and my effort for sprint performance and having positive adaptations for sprinting, that is something that definitely changed my paradigm in terms of like my exercise selection for that particular population.
Nice. Nice, nice, nice. That's a good answer. So I'll kind of even like make it a little more specific then. Is there a metric? Let's talk about like, one specific metric. Is there a metric that you initially trusted that you maybe later realized that you were overweighting?
I would say jump height, honestly. Like jump height is super dope from like a culture standpoint. It's something that's universally understood. Kids will understand that, parents will understand that, general managers at a pro sport will understand that. So you want to include that in your reports just for the sake of like transparency, I suppose. But I've seen significant improvements in jump height with power going down. I've seen improvements in jump height with power going up and stiffness, like modified RSI going down. Like there's various roads that lead to Rome at the end of the day, right? So jump height is a byproduct of certain things, but I don't think by any stretch of the imagination it's like a positive metric that's going to help you when it comes to actually making decisions.
Nice. Yeah, we had a conversation with our volleyball organization. We kind of put that in the presentation was everyone gets very caught up in the jump height, and I get it because you're right. Everyone understands it. It looks good. It can be the output thing that they all want to see. But that's just like the primary, like the what indicator, like, okay, this is what they got. But then we would classify something called secondary metrics. It's like, well, how did they get where that came from, right? That's your jump height. Here are like the secondary metrics that might be, like you said, the time to take off, the eccentric duration, the eccentric velocity. Like there's all these little like things that just branch out from underneath it that might indicate how the number they got is what they got. And then that might be like the next low hanging fruit. So although they might not understand all that, but it just correlates to the big thing, right? But all they care about is the big thing. So it's you could tell them all about the sexy, like, oh look, like, here's the eccentric, velocity, or here's like the time to take off, woo, and all of a sudden there's like what, and you're just like, okay, what their height's here. Don't worry, the height's still there. You know what I mean? It's the sexy metric, I guess. Um, so I'll kind of transition a little bit, but I want to finish the data on this one. If you had to summarize it, what has data made you less confident about and maybe more confident in?
I think in terms of data's backing decisions, it justifies my bias towards incorporating plyometrics and speed training year round, regardless if it's off season or in season. I think having a framework where you can undulate and employ some kind of concurrent method for both plyometrics and speed development, whether it's output based or input based, is so important on the back end when it comes to performance. So if we're talking about like in season training, for example, sports stressor is overall higher in terms of the ratio of stimulus that we're providing these athletes. I think having a framework you can still incorporate kind of supportive plyometrics and supportive speed development work is so important for, again, the whole ecosystem to make sure people continue to stay healthy and ultimately are able to perform not only in the sport but also on the force plates to back our decision making.
Nice. No, that's a good point. I think I think especially for jump sport athletes, I think a lot of coaches might say, well, because they're doing practice, whatever, 4 to 6 times of the week, they're getting their plyometric bucket filled, so to speak. But again, I think it's adding another layer, another lens to it. Like well, is it strictly like intensive? Is it extensive? Is it, all these different names like deep tier, moderate tier, however you want to label it. But I think at the end of the day, it's how can you build both tissue tolerance while also driving output, but also bringing something into the body to then repeat the output, right? Like, how can I build some adaptation while allowing expression of the skills that are going to matter at the core? I don't think it's just simply like, well, one thing is happening here, so we're going to do the other thing over here. I think there's like a blend of ways. I think it's just, kind of sometimes even common sense. Like we could just do these things at a lower intensity level that'll build some robustness, if you want to call it that, to just make them healthier so they can continue to do the things they have to do against better people for longer durations of time. I think if it's that might sound simpler than what it is, but I think that's a good way of going about it. And since you started talking about in season, I think this is a good question too. What do you think the biggest mistake teams make is once the season starts? It doesn't have to be strictly on the training sides of things, like year-round pro organizations. Is there like the biggest mistake that you see teams make, like once the season starts?
I think if you look at a lot of pro sports in Canada versus our counterparts in the States, oftentimes organizations in the States will have a facilitated acclimation phase. So call it like OTAs or mini camps or whatever the case may be. They have some kind of period that's specifically allocated to acclimate and accumulate overall density of ground reaction forces and decelerations and all these things like that that are really important for the health of the athlete. Whereas, excuse me, if you look at what's happening in Canada, CEBL, CFL, like there's no OTA period. There's no acclimation period. So I think that's probably one of the main things, certainly in Canada, that is a huge opportunity. And I would assume that would be the case for a lot of collegiate level athletes and certainly youth athletes, where they just kind of like jump in, and regardless of their preparation, that might be 100% spike in workload. That might be a 300% spike in workload. So we have to talk about like how we can go about managing that as S&Cs, whether we want to inherently like modify practice volume if you have that relationship with the sport coaches, hopefully, or if you're kind of like being a complementary piece to everything on the back end. It's like, okay, cool, your sport volume super high, your density in the weight room is going to be a little bit lower, or whatever the case may be. But that's probably a huge opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in theory, like, that makes the most sense. It's always gonna be the logistics of, well, a couple things, like, are the coaches open-minded to actually adjusting how practices are done from again, they're the main, the head honcho, they're the ones that dictate all that stuff. Are they willing to, like, maybe be curious of what that might look like and see how that changes their team? And then at least even we recognize this too, especially at the high school level, because the logistics of just how practices are scheduled, right? Like kids have school, their parents drive them. Their schedules, I would argue, is some of the hardest schedules to work around, just because they're kind of like in that strict zone of they have no control over a lot of these things. And practices are even like hockey. Some of these guys are on the ice at 9 o'clock at night just to start practice. You know what I mean? So like they might have a couple practices a week, but you have no control of the time just based on ice time or court time or whatever's available for the area, right? So it's like, practically, it's like, how do we even implement some of those solutions? I don't know if you have any opinion on that, but I'd love to get your thoughts on how you might like work that into the logistics for like maybe a younger athlete set.
Yeah, I think the whole ecosystem for youth development in Canada is really. I talk about this all the time, like because I have the experience of working in athletics in Ontario, and I have experience working in athletics in BC, and I say it all the time. Like youth development in BC is at least 10 years behind what's happening in Ontario, in my opinion, in terms of where people are prioritizing, where they're allocating their energy. Like the ratio of sport to actual physical development is
Yeah.
incredibly skewed, and that's in the best case scenario in Canada. But like, just particularly in BC, like I'll go into the facility where there might be like a community event going on or a tournament or whatever the case may be, and I see like 9 year olds like patellofemoral pain, and like that just should not be the case. And like
That's
talking about the
crazy.
hockey situation, like yeah, talking about the hockey situation, it's potentially even worse because like the pressure from a cultural standpoint of these kids to produce at a very young age, and everybody wants to streamline their development because everybody wants to be like the next like Connor McDavid or Sidney Crosby or whatever the case may be. Like we're now seeing that on in real time with like the Canadian juniors. Like you're seeing like Slovenia sweeping us in the last 3 years when their population is significantly lower than ours. Like we don't really have, in my opinion, like the best development framework because we've prioritized production over development.
Yeah. No, that's a good way of summarizing up. You're right. But again, I think it comes down to like they're so caught up in just the output. Like it kind of ties a bow on that. They're just output, 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 output. At some point, I think even Eric Cressy mentions this too. They're seeing like for baseball, anyways, like kids like 11 years old or 12 years old with like Tommy John issues coming up, or and you're just like, how is this happening at like a young age, like such a young age where they're malleable, right? Like it's crazy to see how I don't just know how far the extreme is that we're going with it, but like I'm very curious to see how this kind of pans out. But I think let's try to keep things simple for anyone listening. Like if you had to strip in-season training down to non-negotiables, what's staying?
I would say if you were to narrow down in season training to one thing, it would be high loading, low velocity parameters. Because if we're talking about being a complementary piece and we're prioritizing health over performance, typically the training parameters are going to be more gravitated towards like tissue tolerance, tissue quality, and ensuring the health and robustness of these athletes. So, like, typically doing like the boring high eccentric loading type stuff, as long as you do it responsibly, is going to be the best net positive for the health of the athlete. Because if you look at what's happening from like a performance standpoint, everybody assumes athletic training is just simply doing ballistic work all the time, output based again, that it's going to improve stiffness and all these things like that. But in terms of what's happening within the context of the sport, the ground reaction forces are significantly higher. A volleyball outside hitter, like whatever the case may be, like they're getting the high velocity ballistic contractions within the context of their sport. So we have to be a complementary piece on the other side that is not only going to benefit them from a strength standpoint, but it's immensely going to help them from a health and performance standpoint as well.
Yeah. I think number one, I think tempos are underrated heavily. I think people kind of sleep on tempos a little bit. I think they also might fear, at least, coaches, I think, or like strength conditioning coaches. I think they might fear using tempos like in season for the fear of, right? Like the tissue stress, the soreness, how is that going to impact practice and that kind of thing. Do you find yourself using tempos a lot in season?
Welcome to Iron Performance Center, Niagara's home for real personal and performance training. We're a community obsessed with building durable, explosive, game-ready humans. No gimmicks, no shortcuts, just training that works. From athletes chasing scholarships, to pros chasing championships, to regular people who just want to feel strong, move well, and stay built for real life. If you're willing to work, you're our people. Our system is simple: smart programming, elite coaching, and a culture that pushes you to levels you didn't know you had. With modern technology and principles-based programming, we track your progress, teach you movement skills, and give you every tool you need to perform when it matters most in whatever arena you call home. Iron Performance Center, because performance matters.
I don't do a lot of tempo work, but I will use a lot of eccentric accentuated methods. So you can call that like weight releasers potentially. That might be a two up, one down approach. That might be something as simple as like utilizing some kind of machine and you're adding external load on the eccentric component and just letting them free lift on the concentric. So I'm not necessarily biasing like tempo work per se, but I think just leaning in on the mechanical tension eccentrically is going to be an extreme benefit to the athlete. Now, mind you, you have to be very careful with the volume you do that at. But when it comes to in-season training, like you don't want to introduce novel stimulus. So you kind of early on open the door for whatever is going to happen in season out of the gate. So you can't talk about implementing sprint-based means and methods in week 10 of a regular season. You have to do that from the jump, right? Obviously, there's going to be great exposure and progression overall, but like you have to introduce those things fairly early and just be responsible about the dose and the progression.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. I think this is another one I had for you. Then this kind of makes sense. So then, talking about like novel stimulus, everything else. So where do you think variability does belong in a program, and where do you think we wrongly try to eliminate it?
I think variability is really important from a culture piece, just in terms of just people staying stimulated. You're talking about like the neural pathways of just stimulating like the vestibular system and the brain overall so that you continue to learn, you continue to stay stimulated throughout the training process. In my opinion, if we're looking at an overall macro cycle, I do like a bottleneck kind of approach. So, in a lot of ways, when you're doing an acclimation period, you can afford to have a high level of variability. So, you want to throw more or less the kitchen sink at them so that they are in tune with various foot positions, various loading parameters. So, like incorporating something as simple as like an every rep different. So, if I'm doing a single leg RDL, I'm loading medial, front, and lateral components of that RDL. So I'm hitting different heads of the hamstring complex, for example. I think incorporating that early, almost extensively, like lower intensity, I think is going to provide you a really high return on investment for when you start to enter in season and you narrow down your exercise selection so that ultimately we're not incorporating novel stimulus when it matters the most.
No, that's a good point. That's a fair point. Yeah, it's kind of like because when we kind of look at it, we always say diversity is like one of the mothers of, mitigating risk of injury is just being so diverse. And like as you go through the season, right, we're trying to like find things that they're competent with now. You're right. Almost they get close to the tippy top of the pyramid almost, right? So now we can focus a little more on like, okay, these are the things we're good at. This is a handful of things we're going to focus on. Let's hammer these really well to maximize our strengths while minimizing any weak points we can in preparation for what we hope to be a successful finale to the season, right? So I want to kind of transition a little bit now, in terms of like how we actually coach our athletes. So, what separates coaches, um, athletes respect from maybe that coaches that athletes just comply with, right? So like athletes who respect their coach versus athletes who just kind of comply with their coach.
Yeah, it's really interesting, certainly in the professional space, because you have to form relationships fairly quickly, and you have to really take a vested interest in every single athlete because their perception is all going to be different, their lived experience is all going to be different, and everyone's going to have biases. So I'll give you a really quick example of that in particular, where I had a simple conversation regarding nutrition. So like a lot of athletes don't particularly like to eat right away in the morning, so they go to one practitioner and that practitioner would kind of like berate them like, no, you need to do this, you need to live in this box, this is what the textbook says, da 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 da. And all that does is just close that door, closes the door for more communication and collaboration with that particular athlete, because again, they had different bias, they had a different lived experience, and they in their own experience said, I feel better when I fast on my lower days, quote unquote. Whereas a conversation with me might be a little bit different. It's like, okay, like, how did you feel? What did you eat? Let's talk about that. Okay, here's my concerns, and here's we can kind of close the gap. So it's like, okay, cool. If you're going to be fasting on days 1, 2, and 3, that's cool. It's been shown to help with inflammation and all these things like that. That's totally fine. However, when it comes to game day performance, this is where we need to close the gaps. This is where we talk about like supplementation. This we talk about like macro and micronutrient deficiencies and things like that, right? So just having like an open dialogue, and at the end of the day, like just being a resource to them, not being kind of like a dictator. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. Just trying to be like a human being, trying to meet them where they're at, like you said earlier on. So then, in those situations where you might have, you're doing all the things, you're creating those connections. How would you handle an athlete who is really talented, but maybe is not, let's just say they're poorly invested in the strength conditioning side of things, right? We know athletes, we care more about this stuff than sometimes they do. But how would you handle an athlete who is maybe poorly invested in the performance side of things in the weight room?
Yeah, oftentimes it's a seek to understanding approach. So just kind of removing your ego, your bias, and literally just having like an open dialogue. Like it could be like literally as simple as like, hey, why do you feel the way you do regarding the weight room? Like, you might be able to peel back a couple layers, and it might have stemmed from like a really poor experience that they had in their upbringing through their athletic endeavors. Conversely, like you might have an experience where you just need to educate them on certain matters and certain experiences I've had. It certainly, it's just about like, oh, I didn't know that. This is why you do that. Okay, that makes actually a ton of sense to me. So it could just be as simple as explaining to these athletes, but honestly, with almost every cohort you're going to work with, I always love to apply like the 10-80-10 rule. So like 10% of that cohort is going to be your super keen overachievers, 80% are going to be compliant, and then the bottom 10 are going to be kind of people like you described, and that's fine. But when you are talking about that bottom 10%, the fallacy of the 10-80-10 is that most people allocate 90% of their effort to the bottom 10, and I think that's fairly flawed. However, with that being said, when you have a window of opportunity with a bottom 10 percenter, you got to take it. Like that might be like your foot in the door for something bigger from a relationship standpoint, from a communication standpoint, from an education standpoint to improve their compliance.
Yeah, essentially, if you have the opportunity to just, water the plant, right? If it's opportunities there, nurture it, right? Nurture it and see if maybe it can grow into
Yeah.
something better. If nothing else, don't make it any worse, right? Like I think it really goes back to just being a reasonable human being, right? Like sets and reps aside, just give a shit about the person as a person, and then like you said, try to understand more of like their point of view and their different perspective, and that'll only help them maybe build a trust and a connection that now they're willing to run through a wall, hopefully, when the time comes. Um, is there a conversation you think coaches avoid regularly with their athletes? Maybe they shouldn't?
Avoid. Um, I wouldn't. I wouldn't say so. No. Like, I mean, do you have a position on this? Like, maybe give me an example and I can roll with it.
I think I think when it comes to some conversations, I think maybe was like, for example, the higher end athletes, right? Like I think sometimes coach like strength conditioning coaches might avoid having like conversations on feedback with like these high end athletes because they don't want to like screw them up almost. You know what I mean? Like, okay, they're doing what they're doing. I don't want to, if they're not like following the instructions in the weight room, maybe like those kind of things. You know what I mean? Like almost like the paralysis to give the feedback to the athlete that might be in a position that they're like the star of the team or something like that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I do. I think in a lot of pro settings, certainly, you you have a lot of people that want to be liked, very well liked, and that's just like everything's chill. Like, no, I'm not going to challenge you on this. I'm not going to call you out on your bullshit. And you're trying to develop. You're kind of overreaching in that regard. However, similar to what I was talking about with in season training, you cannot set expectations halfway. You can't set expectations on the tail end of the season or your working relationship. Like, you gotta be able to communicate why you want to go about doing things you want to do. You have to be very collaborative and you have to set bare minimums and expectations really early on, regardless of like you shooting the shit with people or having a good relationship with them. Like, I think establishing those things and then leaning into the soft skills and just again just being yourself is going to be ultimately kind of the main variable. But in a lot of ways, like I see people overcorrecting and just like, yeah, everything's cool. I'm not gonna, you know what I mean? That's how people just don't end up training.
Yeah, I think it's almost like a free pass almost. It's almost like that. I don't know how to call it, but it's almost like a free pass. They kind of say, "Well, it's fine because they're them and I'm this, and like they do what they're doing. I'm not gonna give feedback." But I really I would really hope that great athletes want to be coached, right? Like I would assume a lot of good athletes want the feedback. They want to have that sniper precision, right? Like it might not be their favorite thing, but I would hope that they're curious to maybe find out what their low hanging fruit might be, or at least be curious of what their potential might be, and like see if we can make it better. But I think it just goes back to, giving a shit first and kind of meeting them where they're at. But I'm always curious too, like how we would handle those conversations. Like, okay, it's really not working, but I'm always curious. But um, I did want to move on now a little bit too, because you're in charge of performance staff. So when you're building or leading your team, like your performance staff team, what's the first standard you enforce with them?
First standard is just understanding rules because I think certainly when it comes to performance staffs in Canada, in a lot of ways, you have to be a Swiss Army knife. You have to be a jack of all trades. You have to be the weight room guy, the energy systems guy. You have to be competent with GPS. You have to be competent with so many different criteria that stems just outside of the weight room. So it's really easy to get lost in the sauce in a lot of ways. And more importantly, that's where people end up getting siloed. So I think the allocation of roles and responsibility, having clarity and kind of synchronicity across the entire performance staff and medical staff, mind you, as well, is really, really important. Like you see a lot of miscommunication from staffs at the highest level. Like there's an NBA organization, for example, I was speaking to recently where like fitness was declining and that was the byproduct of things just simply slipping through the cracks because you had a performance staff trying to like every single person on that performance staff was trying to do all this stuff above and beyond, but the basic stuff wasn't being tackled, right? So I think just establishing a constant loop of communication, feedback, and progression with the staff in allocating those roles and responsibilities is something that you have to do early and often.
Nope, that's a good way of putting it. So then, are there behaviors that immediately tell you a coach is not ready for a high performance environment? Because you've gone and hired staff and you've worked with different, staff under you. Are there any behaviors that like immediately tell you that maybe this coach is not ready for the high performance environment?
Yeah, I think as a blanket statement, the higher up you work in high performance, the less ego you're going to see, the more open dialogue you're going to see, and ultimately the environments that I've been a part of that were the most stimulating, the most fun, and ultimately I would argue the best quality were almost like think tanks. Like regardless of where you're at on the hierarchy and the pecking order, everything is open dialogue, and it should be fair discussion about anything. You should be able to audit our return to play system, audit our strength and conditioning. Maybe we can improve from an energy system standpoint, an integration standpoint, whatever the case may be, but that's typically what you see at the highest level. And I really do try to emulate that. But in terms of like a no no, like I think ego is a silent killer in our field. I think if you're lucky enough to be a part of a high performance staff and little things like, like, I don't agree with that. Like, if I was in charge, I would do it this way, or I wouldn't, I would do it in this kind of manner. Like, that is something that is really frowned upon, not just with me, but with a lot of professional organizations as well. That I think, going back to what I was saying before, is ultimately about being collaborative. So having a united front about terminology, communication, roles and responsibilities is going to be vastly, vastly important in that person's success at the end of the day.
No, but hey, for all listening, man, just leave your egos at the door. Just leave your fucking egos at the door. Check it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Be collaborative. I think it's true, right? Like we've seen that sometimes too, especially with like I would say graduating coaches coming from their whether it be their bachelor's degree or their master's degree. Like it's almost like I at least say maybe it comes off this way. They feel like they almost have it all figured out, and like they almost like start splitting hairs, like they're putting the cart before the horse too soon. You're like, okay, we gotta take a step back, man. You're telling me how to put all these things on the paper, but you can't, you don't even know that person's name. God damn it! Like, let's put the cart before the horse here. You know what I mean? Like, let's. Do you know that athlete's name? You don't even talk about the sets and reps until you learn that person's name. Two, I've seen your ass coach a squat. You can't even coach a squat. Don't tell me about how to do all this other shit. I don't want to hear none of it. You know what I mean? Like, stick to some basics, man. um, all right, I want to go through some rapid fire questions. I think these are fun. I think they're fun, but no context, just rapid fire. Most underrated exercise. Go.
I would say, oh God, I'm not good at rapid fire. I'll say that. Okay, most underrated exercise. I will say a penta jump.
Penta jump. Okay. Okay. Why? What came
Mm.
to what yo, what made that guy fly under the radar?
It checks every box for me from a propulsion standpoint, a reactivity standpoint, and a skill and coordination standpoint. You get somebody really good at a penta jump, you're gonna see a lot of positive things on the back end, and in terms of weightlifting and everything else.
That's sick. Everyone seems to stick to the doubles and the triples. Eh? You went fucking straight on the penta. You went like fucking good for you. I like that shit.
Yeah, pentas
Okay.
right
On the
away.
flip side, right away, right, right away. Hey, we're gonna talk about how to jump. No, 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 no. We're gonna figure this out. You got 5 attempts. You'll get your 5 attempts in. Don't worry. Um, most overrated exercise. Go.
I'm gonna say Olympic lifting. Like I'm just gonna say, yeah, like your basic hang clean.
Damn, you're gonna
And
piss off a
I
lot of
like hang
people.
cleans. Like I do Olympic lifts. I try. They're super dope. They're super fun. Like I incorporate them in my own program. But in terms of like, yeah, yeah, like they're a little overrated. Not gonna lie.
Damn, you're gonna piss off a lot of people with that one. Okay, again, no context. This or that. Bilateral or unilateral?
Bilateral.
Oh, I didn't think you were gonna go that way. Okay, why?
Just in terms of like the bandwidth of force expression, bilateral. It's gonna give them the overall framework for improving muscle tissue, strength expression, all these things like that, without any of the braking forces that are associated with like feeling sore, fatigued, or potentially cause injuries.
See, okay. I like that answer. I like that answer because I know right now everyone's like, unilateral for athletes, everything else, and I get it. It's not bad, but I was like, okay, I'm glad someone agreed with me on the bilateral aspect, and you hit the expression part. Okay, next one, VBT or RPE? Go.
RPE. I was like really
Oh,
big on the VBT stuff. I would say like 5 years ago, I was big on VBT. I think it is useful from an auto regulation standpoint, but again, going back to like the inputs versus outputs, I will gravitate towards RP way more than VBT. And more importantly, like the entire framework of like speed, strength, speed, like all that stuff. Like I think it's in terms of what information you're providing the nervous system, it's irrelevant.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of gray. I think again, people love charts, they love buckets, they love like strict standards which they can gauge something on. But physiologically, like there's so much gray area, it's all muddled in between, right? Like it's, but I get it. It's, I thought, okay, that's good. RP. I didn't think you were gonna go the RP route. Okay, next one: heavy slow or light fast. Go.
Heavy slow, heavy slow. It's in terms of checking the health box and having it an approach of like one step back, three steps forward in terms of ROI on your investment, heavy and slow, especially with
Okay.
like quote unquote elastic or kind of like ballistic type athletes, your volleyball players, your basketball players, highest ROI.
Damn. Damn, that's good. This is good. A lot of, hey, I love how you're kind of contradicting some things. I love that. I love the fact that you're kind of going against the grain a little bit here. Hey, you're gonna blow young coaches, man. Tune in. Okay, last one. Consistency or variety.
Consistency, consistency.
Okay, okay. Why?
It's just it's about watering the bamboo at the end of the day, right? I believe in having a cumulative effect, having multiple touch points and training at a really, really high level for a long time. Like we've seen what that does. Like look at Tom Brady, he just beat his 40 from when he was leaving university. Like you train at a high level for a long time, it's going to be an extremely positive thing for your health and performance.
There you go. Okay, a coaching hill you'll die on.
A coaching hill I'll die on. I'm stuck on this one, I'm not gonna lie. I was ready for the hill.
You're like, we're
Um
ramping. We're trying to get to the top of the hill, man. I was trying to get. This is like the fucking finish line.
I think, especially now with people who are entering professional sport who are dual certified, I think that's fantastic. But I think in terms of providing an excellent program and more importantly, getting buy-in from the athletes that you work with, they have to see you be a competent mover. So I think the hill that I'm going to die on is that everyone has to train and everybody has to continue to aspire to being awesome in their own training and their own skill development. That is the lowest hanging fruit for success in any sport.
Yeah, practice what you preach, man. Be in the trenches. Do the thing. Just do the damn thing. I think that's a fair statement too, because I truly believe like, and we tell our staff, we tell our interns too, like we'll never program anything that we ourselves haven't done on our own as well, right? Doesn't mean you have to be the best at it, but you should never be putting something in a program that you haven't done yourself. That makes no sense to me. If you're not competent, like, yeah, I know you hate like the hang cleans as an example. If you're not competent at teaching doing Olympic lifting, then just don't program it. Program what you're comfortable programming. Like teach them things you've done before. That way it's not foreign. Now, don't just stand up and pull shit out your ass because you think they should be doing it. You know what I mean? Like, I would argue the same thing. Like, why don't you go to a practice? Like, if you're coaching basketball players, you don't have to be fucking LeBron James or Michael Jordan, but like, maybe try running through a basic practice, like learn some of the lingo, like put yourself in their shoes and see what they're going through and feel those things. I think it all sounds like just common sense shit from a performance standpoint. We always tend to ignore the common sense, It's crazy. Oh, man, oh man. Okay. Best advice you ever ignored.
Best advice I've ever ignored. Probably probably early on in my career when I was being very much entrenched in the Poliquin school of thought, where it's like this is it, this is the system, and also at the same time seeing those same people have a lot of systemic value issues in terms of quality of life, pay, overall fulfillment in their career. The best piece of advice I didn't take was understanding that that wasn't it. There was so much more to the rabbit hole of performance that I wanted to learn. I wanted to dive in on in my own development. So I think for anybody listening who's really keen on their development from an education standpoint is like, don't conform to certain ways of thinking. I think you taking bits and pieces of different people, different methodologies, different schools of thoughts, and ultimately formulating your own quote unquote system is going to be the best bang for your buck.
That's a great piece of hey, that is a good closing statement. All right, Tanner, if people want to learn more about you, get in touch with you, just find out more about what you do, what's the best way to reach you?
Probably Instagram. I would say at Coach Care. If you want to reach out, I'll try my best to respond. I'm always happy to help however I can with the time that I have. So if anybody wants to reach out, totally give them an open invitation.
Fantastic. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is it. That's another episode of the Performance Matters podcast. As always, you can find us. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on YouTube, and just be a good human being and subscribe. That way you can hear us rant on a weekly basis. You might pick up a few nuggets, you never know, but if nothing else, you're at least part of the cool kid community. Coach Tanner Care from the Vancouver Bandits and of course the BC Lions, big thank you for coming on the podcast. Folks, we will see you all next time.